with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, before we start today's episode, I have a friend from Copenhagen Business School, and he's a former guest on Phronesis, Eric Guthey. And he is here to talk a little bit about a conference that they have coming up. And he has been instrumental in organizing it. Eric.
Scott, it is so great for you to have me on for this. I was literally sailing on the south coast of England with one of your upcoming guests, Jonathan Gosling, and we were listening to an episode of Phronesis and talking about how great the podcast is, and talking about the conference that we're going to be hosting at the Copenhagen Business School from December 10th to 12th of this year. It's the 21st International Study and Leadership Conference. We hosted way back in 2014. And as we talked, we realized that ISLC founders and participants number significantly among the guests who appeared on the Phronesis podcast. Keith Grint was one of your guests, and he helped found this conference. Dennis Tourish, who you had on, hosted the conference last year along with his colleague Zahira Jazer. Joanne Chula is a constant contributor to this conference. So are Suze Wilson, Brad Jackson, Steve Kempster, Susan Murphy, Mariel Bean, who you had on, who did a fantastic podcast with you about complexity leadership in COVID. She is one of our keynote speakers this year and is also, by the way, just recently inaugurated as an honorary doctor at CBS. And then hopefully Scott, the infamous Scott Allen himself, will appear.
I think you sent me an image that had advice for 5 cents or something like that,
Practical wisdom for leaders, 5 cents a pop. We'll set up a booth for you at the conference.
Well, how can people learn more? This sounds awesome.
So the web page for the conference, we'll post it on your notes page, but it's www.conferencemanager.dk/ISLC 2023. Sorry, that's such a mouthful. But if you just Google ISLC 2023, you'll find it. Okay. And I should say that the theme of the conference this year is leadership and systems change, which fits well with a lot of the discussions you have on Phronesis, because I really see the way that in your conversations, you're raising the bar to bring leadership practitioners and leadership scholars to grapple with how perspectives on leadership can contribute to important issues like climate change, diversity, harassment, even how we've got the war in Ukraine. And what we're aiming for is both a large smattering of any research on leadership, but also some serious discussions about how we can bend the craft of leadership studies to address grand challenges and the task of addressing and improving even global systems.
Well, I think it's a noble endeavor, sir. And for listeners, yes, the link to the conference is in the show notes, so please check it out there. If you'd like to present, submissions are due July 31st, so you have some time if you'd like to submit and actually present at the conference.
For those of you who haven't been to Copenhagen before, it's a wonderful city in the summer. It's also a wonderful city in the winter, and we're going to put on the dog for people when they come. Copenhagen is known for its food, and it's the Danish word for how we get comfortable in Denmark is hygge. and it will be a very hygge conference, and we hope to see as many people as possible.
See, now that sounds like so the International Studying Leadership Conference sounds great, but the Hygge Conference sounds just cozy.
Very well pronounced, by the way. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Thank you so much, Eric. Really, really appreciate your time today. And everybody, now here is today's show. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Phronesis Podcast. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world. Today, I have a returning guest, Diogo Seixas, and he is a dreamer, a thinker, a learner, and an educator. He talks about life in the 30s. Occasionally, he geeks out on people and organizations and that whole kind of world. And you were an early guest, G, and I think we had committed at the end of that episode to talk annually. Well, I failed. I apologize, but we're back together today. And
yes,
you are in year 3 of your Ph.D. program. You have published a book. Tell us a little bit about you. Bring us up to speed. And I know you've been teaching as well, so maybe we get into that conversation about work in the classroom.
Yeah, that'll be cool. Thanks, guys, for having me back. Just like making like a little connection now, because when you were reading my bio now, I was like, well, like that's like a great summary of what happened these past 3 years. So honestly, like I know that's been 3 years, but it feels like 1 year, to be honest, because everything went by so fast. Like, you just said like, wow, 3 years. And for me, it's kind of the same thing. I remember when I first started the PhD, I was like, well, 4 years, if everything goes right, that's like a big commitment, especially, I was, I think about 27, 28 years old, I think. So yeah, I was like, man, like this is gonna be a long journey, but turns out 3 years, I'm here. I am almost done. So yeah, it's been interesting. Definitely. It's been like an interesting journey. Well, from where we left last time in 2020. So yeah, back then I was just starting the PhD. I think I started that fall, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
Yes.
And I was kind of like in a transition period. I was working a lot with leadership development, and I had my company back in Brazil, and then that worked also with leadership development for students. And then I was about to move to the PhD, so I was in this transition process that I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And then the book came about, which was when I made that decision of like, okay, if I want to be a great professional, like a great professor, a great researcher, I do have to dedicate a lot of time in my PhD. So I decided to, I don't know if it's like put a period in the time of my life, maybe a comma, a colon, something like that. I don't know how I call it.
An ellipse. Probably a dot.
I think so. Yeah.
Or an M dash or an N dash. It could be any of these.
Yeah, definitely not a period, I think. We'll see. We'll see where life will take me. But yeah. So yeah, it was like that transition period. And the book came to represent that transition, from one life to the PhD program. So basically, as my bio also says, like dreamer, I put that always like in front because I always believe that like for things to happen in the real world, you got to think, you got to dream about things first. And I used to help people a lot in like, okay, like what do you do for life? Like what's your career goal, or like what's your life goal? And even if you don't have one, like let's, do little things so we can get closer to that one goal. So the book, it's called Enjoy the Ride. It is this, I like to say that it's almost like a album of songs, when you put like all your favorite songs in one album. So the book is this, like I put all my favorite reflections, all my favorite exercises, this kind of like course that I created to help people not to find their dreams specifically, but at least like to get a more clear vision of what that looks like and enjoy the ride towards that point. So that's where the book name comes from. Yeah, so that came out in December that year. So it's almost 3 years in December this year that the book's been out. And it was an interesting journey writing that and editing and, putting it out. And definitely I'm super happy that I was able to finish that, so it was pretty cool.
Good. And talk to me about the PhD program. What have been a couple observations, maybe, the wonderful things that have occurred? What are some of the challenges you've experienced? I mean, I think listeners, definitely, for anyone out there thinking that they want to do a PhD, they want to go through that process. What has your experience been?
It's been very different than what I imagined it would have been. Not in a bad way, but really because some things I was not expecting. Like I got into the PhD program because I want to become a college professor. I always talked about education and leadership and teams, like, and always like looking from the outside. But then one day it hit me. I was like, well, why not, starting that change from inside too, So that's where what the main goal was. It's like, okay, I want to become a college professor. And I knew the research would be a component of the PhD. Here at SIU, it's more research focused than actually teaching focused. So the first 2 years of the program here, we go through all different topics that you can think. And our focus is management, organizational behavior. So the first 2 years, it's broad view of all the topics. So we get a good idea of what is out there. We find our passions, and then we decide on what we want to work on. And I've been working a little bit with teams, a little bit with career. I worked a little bit with the romance of leadership, which is a super interesting topic that got me, I remember, like on my first semester, and I started doing research on that later too. So it's nice because like I was able to translate all my passions into the research world too. It was way harder than I thought it would have been because, having English as a second language, I'm from Brazil originally, so having English as a second language, and I like to write, but I write as I talk. It was a challenge to kind of adapt that type of writing to the research writing. And I was fortunate enough that right at the beginning, we had a lot of topics on how to write papers. And I remember like one specific paper, I won't remember the author, but I remember them talking about, that we are responsible also to translating the very specific and very research words to the people that are not from that environment. So that information is available to everybody, So I always had that in my mind. So every time I write now, I try to blend both styles, something more academic wise, but also never losing my essence, like who I am in writing. So yeah, those were my first 2 years, and it was good. Comprehensive exams, finished that. And then now I'm actually a PhD candidate, right? After that whole process. So all but dissertation, that's what we call here. And our third year is when we actually start teaching. So that's why, when we first started talking, I had a lot of experience in teaching and coaching and mentoring before, but it wasn't the same culture. It wasn't the same system, the same structure as it is the classroom. So instead of starting from scratch, saying, okay, from zero, based in all the experiences I've ever had with other professors and a little bit of what I learned also with teaching, I thought about reaching out for people I knew that, are good with teaching and have been doing that for a while. And that's how we reconnect, I guess. So, yeah.
So what did you experience? What were some of your observations of being in the classroom in that setting as the professor?
Yeah. So that's a great observation to start with, because I think like as soon as I jumped in the classroom, I was like, I am the professor, like the instructor. Like I'm not the student anymore, although I'm still a student, in the PhD program. And it was so funny because like many times, most of my friends, they are PhD students also, and we are teaching classes. And it was just like funny to realize that like the future of the current students where we live, they are in our hands. So we are responsible for their education. So it gives you like a different type of motivation when you think like that, when you think that it's not about just like sharing information, but yes, like you are part of the educational process of many people, and those people are going to influence other people, whatever they're going to go work for, So that was kind of scary at the beginning, but then it became like a big motivational factor. But I think like one of the big struggles I had was I teach organizational behavior at 300 level class, and we were talking about teams and groups, and we talked about a role conflict, right? That it's basically when we have multiple roles. Like, so I am instructor, I'm also a student, I'm also a son, I'm also a brother. So we have different roles, and like sometimes the decisions you make, they get those roles into conflict. And a lot of times the decisions I have to make inside the classroom, I have my student role and my professor role in conflict, because it's one of those things where, well, I am responsible for your education, but at the same time, as a student, I'm always asking like, okay, do they really need to know this? Or if they do, what's the best way that I can teach? I can pass that knowledge. And I think that was also another struggle, was how different can I be without altering the educational system that we have today, thinking about the exams and multiple choices or true or false and group presentations and quizzes, and like how different can you be and how far can you go in such things in a way that it's not scary for students, it's not beyond expectations of the college as well. So I think that's where I was and where I am. So I'm always like trying to do things. And I think like almost every day, every time I have to teach a class, I have to step back and say, okay, from the professor's perspective, yes, like this makes sense. But from a student perspective, like, does it make sense? Like, are they going to use this? Do they need to know this? And what level, what depth they need to know all those things? So yes, it's been a journey, and I've done like competitions between them, like helping them study for exams. I try to bring as much as I can from outside the classroom. And, I was always like, oh, this could be like a great topic, but I already taught this lesson. And it was like, well, it doesn't have to be perfect. So even though the topic, it's not in the future or it's not in the past, how can I still bring this topic? Because I know that's relevant for students and they can learn from it, So it was a deconstruction process that happened while I was constructing my own classroom. So it was interesting. Yeah.
Deconstruction while constructing.
Yeah. Pretty much. But it was cool. It was a great experience. We have another, I think like 2-3 weeks, because we were done about first week of May here with the classes, and then they have finals, and then the semester is over. But yeah, and one last thing that really got me was when I was about to start teaching, I was talking to my parents and, talking about like professors they had and professors I had. And we had good professors, bad professors. We had like different experiences. And my mom said something like, we need more humane professors. I was like, wow, like that's very deep, like let's explore more of that. And it's more like to the level of, we have classes that there are size of 10 and size 25, 30, 300, and how can you treat people one by one, and understand each one's case. And I understand that can be very overwhelming and hard for people, but that was always like a perspective that I tried to have from day one, it's seeing each one as an individual and like just trying to help if they need help and if they want help, of course.
Well, you're making me think of, because I wrote down on literally the piece of paper before you had shared with what your mom said. In undergrad, I went to a large public institution where I really don't remember more than one or two things a professor ever said, nor can I remember any of their names. And I didn't come across just really great professors until my graduate program and in my Ph.D. program, where I came across some people who were not only incredibly knowledgeable about their domain, but they were incredibly skilled at building relationships. That's always, for me, been the North Star, that if I can build a relationship, and obviously these are not becoming my friends, maybe after they're graduated and we go to lunch every once in a while and keep the relationship going, they become a friend, but not in that teacher-student dynamic. But building that relationship and actually trying to get to know them, what they're involved in, what they're passionate about, what it is that they are kind of turned on by the topic, what they enjoy about the topic, and really building a relationship. For me, probably no one ever said that to you except for your mom, but that humanity, connecting with someone on a person-to-person level and letting them know that you care, boy, having that modeled for me was such a gift, because again, I didn't have it modeled as an undergrad, and it is what it is. But that care and that genuine desire to build a relationship for me has just really, really, really been beneficial. And then I did an exercise maybe 3 weeks ago right now. I have a group of juniors in college, and this is a course in leadership. I was modeling feedback, receiving feedback. And I said to them, okay, what have you really enjoyed about this class? What should I consider changing for next time? What should I never do again? And they were almost blown away that a professor would ask them for feedback, that a professor would say, your opinion matters. And of course, I'm not going to act on all of it. I can't act on all of it. I'm not going to get rid of a book or some other things that, sometimes you hear the students say, but I learn a lot. I learn a lot about what fires them up, what's de-energizing, what's exciting, what they want more of, what they want less of. And then I can go away and design again and try a new iteration. So sometimes I hear people say, oh, I can't stand working with millennials. That's what I would hear years ago. And now it's, oh, Gen Z. Well, if you talk with them and you build a relationship and you connect and you listen to their perspective, you hear some pretty interesting things. So for me, those two things have been so helpful in the classroom, building a relationship. Now, there's times where I've had an online class of 70 students and it's just very difficult to do. But if I'm face-to-face and it's 25, 30 students, which at my institution is generally the number, then I can hone in and go and try and get to know them and then learn from them and hear from them what their experience is like, and adjust and shift and tweak and then design moving forward, right?
I think that's the key point. It's learning from them, right? Because we teach like in business or like whatever you do, we always say, understand your customer, right? Understand who are you doing that for? So getting that feedback and trying to understand, it's trying to meet halfway, right? It's okay, what do you want? What's good for you? What's not? And how can I meet those expectations based on the boundaries I can? It's definitely an important thing. I did a similar activity on day one of class 2. I asked them like, what makes a great professor? What makes a great class? What makes a great student also? And I want to show their plans for the future. My idea was to connect the class on the things that are important to them. I don't think I did a good job at that just because of the variety of career goals that they had. But every time I had a one-on-one conversation with them, I was able to always like relate like, oh, like I remember that you wanted to become an entrepreneur. So yeah, like this makes sense for you or not, so like trying to create that level of connection and feedback. So I think that that's key, just because very often the only feedback we get, it's at the end of the semester, right? So I wanted to kind of keep it going with the feedback.
As soon as you find out that their passion is football or lacrosse or Greek life or student government, or that they're working at Whole Foods, as soon as you learn some of those things about them, then I think you can also get into some things where, especially with organizational behavior, you can start contextualizing the content in a little bit of a different way, right? You can say, how does this apply on the football team? And you're talking about teams, you're talking about culture, or you're talking about norms, or you're talking about any number of other different topics we discuss. All of a sudden, what I love is having those light bulbs go on of, oh, wow, I'm literally swimming in this every day, this content. This is so cool. If I open my eyes and just look around me, it's all over the swimming and diving team. It's all over the Residence Hall Association. It's here. And so contextualizing the content too is something I'm always thinking about because, I've written a textbook. Now, we tried very hard to do what I'm about to say in that textbook, but at times they can come off as these kind of just white-walled, kind of plastic, not in any way, shape, or form relevant to me kind of experience, when some of these concepts are so cool. Organizational behavior concepts are all over the film, any film about the Avengers, right? It's there. A lot of the concepts are there if we see it. So that's another thing I'm always thinking about is how do we contextualize this content to make it relevant to where they are, right?
That's beautiful. One thing I've been doing too is, for example, I treat the classroom as an organization as well, right? So, for example, when I'm talking about personality and values, I'm like, okay, how can we apply that to the classroom? Like imagine that first day of classes, like I asked you, let's see who you are. Let's assess your personality. Tell me about your values and how can we apply that? Like motivation. How can you have more autonomy? How can you create mastery? How can you have purpose? So I'm always like picking their brains on how to apply the class content to the classroom, because I wish in the future I can get that knowledge and reapply again to the class, and then we get out of the regular format of classroom and we can, start putting like a few new things and improve the scenario. So,
well, and you just mentioned something really important there, regular format. So what does that mean? Well, oftentimes that's another PowerPoint slide deck with about 50 slides in about 50 minutes. And, another thing I often think about is how do I make this experience feel not only just different from a normal class, that it's not going to be the same old thing every day where we are opening up a slide deck and I'm unloading, we're on a PowerPoint death march, dark room, talk at you for 50 minutes. And in some cases, we have to do that. I'm not, for listeners, suggesting that's not the case. But are we switching up how we deliver the content? And so I think of it almost as a recipe. I might have a TED Talk. We might have a quick dialogue. I might lecturette for 7 minutes. I might do a case with a student in their organization that they're a member of, how this stuff applies in the hockey team. And then all of a sudden, we're at 50 minutes. And I do something a little bit different next time. And it's not this sing-songy type experience, the same thing over and over, or at least that's my goal, is that it doesn't always feel the same. And we're using reading, we're watching documentaries, we're listening to podcasts, we are engaged in dialogue, we're doing activities, we're doing live cases, we have alumni speaking about how the content is relevant. We're weaving in different instructional strategies to help communicate the content, not only for different learning styles, but just so that the course, people come and they're kind of like, well, what are we going to do today? This has been interesting.
Yeah. I saw once that it was like a friend that told me that like quality, it's basically when expectations are exceed, so when students come to class and they have like expectation that it's just going to be 50 slides and the professor's going to be talking all the time, and whatever you do that's different than what they are expecting, you have a good quality, like you have a good classroom, and of course you are raising the bar every time you do that. But that's also a great thing, because that's another thing that I was like, very much afraid. I was like, well, what if down the line, after teaching like 10, 20 years, you, of course, like you have good days and bad days, but what if like you let the bad days influence you more than the good days? Then you're going to go back to that same format of doing the same things. And if you do that, you're just creating that format culture, basically, in which, classes are not engaging, classes are not fun. And then students also think that classes are not fun. And we create a culture that education is not fun.
Yep.
And it shouldn't be like that.
No.
So every time we go to the classroom and we bring one different thing, like it doesn't matter if it's a conversation, a TED Talk, a podcast, whatever, we're not only influencing their culture and their education, but we are creating a different culture in education that if we can be examples, other people are going to do the same. And then little by little, we can change the educational system. I know that it's your topic, but honestly, I think like that's even like my main goal going to academia is to do different than I've gone through, basically.
Sure. And I think you said something there that really stood up for me also. You said raise the bar. And I think we can challenge the heck out of students. We can challenge them and challenge them to work at higher levels than they have. But I think it's Vygotsky. I don't know if that's the correct Vygotsky. The zone of proximal development, or another easy way to say that is challenge and support. I think we can push them to work above and beyond what they thought was capable, but we also have to combine that with that support and that developmental eye, because, they're in different places, they're individuals. Some of them want to be there. Some of them we're influencing them or challenging them to want to be there. Some of them we don't ever get through to in certain cases. They're not ready for it, or they're not motivated, or I wasn't the person to deliver the communication that would resonate for them. There's a number of different dynamics. But that challenge and support and them accomplishing some things that they didn't think they could is also so much fun to see, right? And so I love the classroom because I really do view it as a laboratory where, again, and I don't want listeners to think that this is some freewheeling, non-intentional experience. We have learning outcomes, we have learning objectives, we have a place that we're trying to get, but can we ultimately spark curiosity in the students? Can we ultimately develop a passion for them in the topic and help them see this topic and its relevance all around them and engage, right?
It's almost like it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's just like improving the conditions so the ride is more smooth.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Destination is the same. Like we just want to get there and a little more, enjoying the ride a little better, I guess.
Yes.
There we go.
It's a really fun conversation, and I'm excited that you are in the classroom and you have this opportunity to experiment and to explore. And again, just like I view parenting as an opportunity to practice leadership, I really do view the classroom as an opportunity to practice leadership. And sometimes I do better than others. Sometimes I've failed. Sometimes it has not worked the way I'd hoped it would. But again, 9 times out of 10, if I build a relationship, if they know that I'm open to hearing their feedback, the students are very forgiving when things don't work. I have this thing coming up in a couple of weeks where we're going to do some VR activities, virtual reality activities, team building in virtual reality. And that could fail miserably. I don't know. I'm a little bit actually kind of anxious about it. And I know that they'll be forgiving if they experience it as a terrible experience, because they'll be able to look at me and say, yeah, don't do that again, Scott. Or, that was awesome. I like that.
Yeah, that's it. So I told you earlier that I did a competition with them, right? And because they always ask me like, oh, can we do this? It's organizational behavior. We go to like a bunch of topics. There's like a bunch of theories, definitions. So it is hard to remember everything when we go to the exam, And they're always like, oh, you got to do a review. And then I was like, the night before, I was like, how do I review like 4 chapters of like definitions? It was boring even for me, And I've been coaching tennis also. And usually when you teach like little kids, so like age like 8 to even like I think like 5 to 10, they love competition. So like whatever you do that you put them to compete against each other, they love it. I was like, well, I'm gonna try to do something similar in the classroom. And like, as soon as I get there, I told them, I was like, guys, this can be a complete failure, or it can be like one of the best things we've ever done. We won't know until we try. So let's just like see how it works, And I kind of like just created a game on how they were organized in groups and answering questions, and depending on how they did it, they could steal questions from another person, they could get points, and there was like a prize towards the end, and I got like very good feedback from that too. But it's one of those things where like just try it. Like if it doesn't work, you're gonna have another 30 lessons to try something different just in that semester, plus all the other years you're gonna keep teaching. So yeah, it's been a great experience. I love it. I thought it would be very hard, and it is hard, but at the same time, it's very fulfilling. Like the semester just flew by, and I felt very, very good about everything.
And then another benefit of building the relationships, at least for me, is that I am, you said 10 to 20 years in. I am.
Oh, there we go.
I'm 16 years in roughly. But if I'm building relationships, you know what? It keeps me in. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me curious. It keeps me wanting to do better because that's what they deserve. And again, I also just love the puzzle of, okay, how do we make an online course incredible? Does the recipe exist? I think it can. I think I had some colleagues who were like, nope, it doesn't exist. It can't happen. Well, I believe we can create a good course or high flex. That's a very challenging where you have some folks on the internet, some folks live in the room, and that's a challenging context. But I view that as a puzzle to be figured out. And I view that as an opportunity to experiment and to learn. And again, ultimately, how do I create the best learning experience for these individuals? Because online is going nowhere. High flex, probably going to be a thing. In person, yes. So if I can master those 3 different domains, those mediums, then that's a good skill to have. It just is. Yeah. So I just have great respect for the fact that you're not only kind of standing at the precipice of, I imagine, starting all of the climb of the dissertation, but you're also in the classroom and getting that experience and experimenting and exploring. But I wish someone would said to me, it's about the relationships you build. And again, I'm so lucky for having that modeled for me, but oof, right?
Yeah.
Not one, I can't tell you the name of one of my professors in undergraduate. I can't. That's too bad. That's tragic.
Yeah.
That's tragic. Now,
it's
great professors in graduate school, incredible human beings that, you know what? I got a Ph.D. because my graduate professor, one of my primary graduate professors said, Scott, have you ever thought about it? You could do it, right? And it's those people, Brenda Gardner, who, thankfully I crossed paths with her because it made all the difference in my life.
Wow. Yeah. That's the beauty of, the profession also. It's like having that impact, right? That's beautiful.
Yep. Yep. Well, as we wind down our time today, sir, what have you been listening to, reading, streaming? What's caught your attention in recent times? I imagine you've been reading a lot of journal articles. So other than journal and academic work, what's caught your attention in recent times?
It's funny that you ask, because, I've always been a big reader of leadership teams, like emotions, like whatever is people related. But again, like from my bio, I said that I talk about life in the 30s, right? And I became, 31 last year, so 30 a couple of years ago. And that was a weird transition. Weird because you keep asking like, okay, like, am I the right path? And then you compare yourself to other people, and all those like existential questions, that you have about life. So yeah, so lately I've been reading more about that, about like life in general. A couple authors in from Brazil, actually. Her name is Ana Sui. She talks a lot about relationships and love, which was pretty cool. I also started writing another book on the 30s. So
Good.
I yeah, because I think like, then in talking to people and writing is my way of connecting to the world also, so every time I go through some sort of existential crisis, such as like the first book, all of those things are like questions I had myself, and I think I found a reasonable answer, and then I wrote about it. And here, like if people want to share that kind of line, they can. And with the 30s is the same thing. So I've been reading a lot of like Brazilian authors lately. So Ana is one of them, but it's mostly about like life at 30s and how weird this transition is, where you are an adult, but you don't feel like you are an adult, and you don't know what makes you an adult. So yeah, so there's like a lot of questions like that. Do you feel like an adult?
Do I feel like an adult? Well, I just turned 50. So you were turning 30 and I was turning 50. And, every decade for me, I'm thankful for this, has been better than the previous decade. So my 20s were so much better than my teens, and my 30s were so much better than my 20s, and my 40s were so much better than my 30s and 20s and teens. So I feel very, very, very fortunate. No, I don't have it all figured out, but you know what? It's fun exploring, and it's fun being curious about the world. And I pay close attention to where's my energy. And this podcast and having conversations with people like you is where my energy is right now. I just love it. And so another interesting thing we could explore down the road is that at times, I think if you're a part of the academy, quote unquote, and you've gone through this PhD program and you're going to be a scholar, et cetera, I think at times it can be a fairly narrowly defined as to what that means. But you can contribute in new and different ways. Like this podcast has been a contribution. And for me, it's so energizing, much more energizing than writing a journal article.
Yeah, I bet.
Now, that's part of the gig. You got to do that. But, I'm going to say, and my energy, if I'm paying close attention, is in this space. So having conversation, having dialogue, highlighting other people's work, and getting their good work out into the world. I love that. I absolutely love that. So, well, sir,
Awesome.
We'll do it again. Let's have our next conversation before your defense. Okay.
Okay.
When you reach out.
I can. Yes, it's gonna be soon, I think. But yes.
The defense of your actual dissertation?
No. The defense hopefully is gonna be May next year. Actually, the proposal it's by the summer now. Okay. Yeah. So proposal summer, and then start looking for jobs already and all that stuff. So I'm excited about everything that it's about to come. Definitely. Yeah.
Good. Well, let's talk before your defense of the dissertation.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Okay, sir.
Awesome.
Be well.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
A couple things stand out for me in this conversation, and boy, that was a fun one. It was fun to catch up, hear about his adventures in the PhD program, hear about his adventures in the classroom. And for me, the practical wisdom, there's really a couple things. First, experimentation and listening to your quote-unquote customer. Listening and learning from those who are experienced in the classroom and taking feedback, modeling feedback is just a wonderful opportunity as we're designing our courses. And number two, relationships. It's all about relationships. And do we build relationships with our students? Do we get to know them? Do we get to know about what they hope to accomplish in their career, what they want to do, what interests, and are we sparking curiosity in those students? It's a fun puzzle. I love the whole process of designing a course and trying to do so in a way that will not only engage, but spark curiosity and create a space where we can develop relationships. I know that's not the situation for all individuals, but the spirit is the same. Do people know that we care? Do people know that we want them to succeed? And are we building a relationship with others? Sounds like leadership to me, in part. Everyone, as always, thank you so much for checking in. Take care. Be well. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.